Well, good morning. Thank you for being with us today. And this is one of our quarterly client financial planning webinars that we've begun. As you may know, at Asset Management Resources, we are in the practice now of having a portfolio-oriented webinar each quarter, usually in the first month of the quarter, where we talk about what's happening in the markets and how it is impacting our decisions relating to the management of our clients' portfolios. Talk about economic activity and what's happening in the markets. And we've also begun the practice of having a financial planning oriented discussion. Contents are a little different, a little less focused on economics and market activities, and more on some of the basic important priorities that our clients may want to be thinking about, the issues with legislation or whatever the latest issues may be or topic of interest. And so thanks for being with us today. Today our topic is the legacy of your love and values, creating a legacy letter. And our intention today will be to go through a guest speaker. We're going to be joined by Susan Turnbull. I'll tell you more about her in just a moment. We're going to have her start us off with that presentation. We'll also be sharing with you some information about recent topics that have been coming up and some interest from our clients about financial planning questions and market related issues that we'll just touch on briefly. But we have some financial planning content as well that will tell you about some great tools that are available and some of the ways we, in overview, are trying to consider how to manage your investments. There'll be plenty of time for questions, and if you'd like to ask questions, you may notice that there is a Q&A button you're welcome to use at any time during the presentation today. There's also an opportunity if you want to, toward the end, or if you want to vocalize a question, we'll allow for that. It's set up right now where your line is muted, so if there's background noise, nothing to worry about. But we'll have the opportunity for questions as well throughout or at the end. Mostly we're expecting to do it in sections as we go through the content today. As you may know, my name is Chris Boyd. I'm the founder and chief executive officer for the firm Asset Management Resources. We're a registered investment advisor firm. And I'm joined today as part of our team presenting by both Scott Birmingham and Michael Perna, who will each later in the presentation have some comments to share as we get into the financial planning discussion that we've prepared over and above Susan Turnbull's content. Gentlemen, well, they'll be speaking later. I just wanted to mention that they're here. So then we also are joined by our team, not at all times. Just want you to be aware that we have many members of our team, including Brian Regan, who's our Chief Investment Officer, Kristen Boyd, my wife, but who handles our client service coordination. Kathy Ingersoll is on the call with us today. She's our marketing director, and she may be chiming in as needed because of the handling the slides for us throughout the presentation. And Teresa Chiriotti is an important part of our team as well. Let's tell you a little bit about Susan Turnbull. My first encounter with Susan was, I think, when she was a guest on my radio show more than a decade ago. But it may have been after a presentation for the Financial Planning Association. I think that's how I first became aware of her. Her message and mission has stuck with me ever since, though. She's been promoting to clients and for advisors speaking with clients about the notion of legacy. We as financial planners and estate planners tend to focus on legacy too often in terms of stuff. And we plan for who gets what and the generational transfer of wealth, which certainly is important. However, Susan has been helping families think in terms of generational transfer of values and life's lessons. She's the author of a number of books and tools in this process. And for our clients and attendees who will be receiving a copy of Susan's book, The Wealth of Your Life, a step-by-step guide to creating your ethical will. The term ethical will and legacy letter are sometimes interchangeable. This might be a really useful tool. It might be described as a workbook for you, and I think you'll find it extremely valuable. For those who are our clients and who came as a consequence of our invitation, you'll be able to pick up a copy of that book. If you'd like to stop by our office tomorrow, we'll have it available between the hours of 9 and 5. If you don't get an opportunity to stop by tomorrow, you can reach out to us to coordinate when we can have that for you and make it available. I'm sure she'll tell you more about that as well. And you can learn more about Susan and her services, perhaps if you desire more in-depth coaching services as it relates to this effort, at personallegacyadvisors.com. I think you're going to find this content to be extraordinarily valuable, and I'm eager to have Susan start. So let me turn things over to Susan at this time. Susan, is she muted?
No, I'm here. I'm waiting for my PowerPoint to come up.
All right, very good.
Great. Can everybody see that?
Yes, looks good.
Great. Good morning. And I see I have a light coming right over my face, which wasn't there a few minutes ago. Let me just change the angle of my screen a little bit. Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for your interest in attending this program this morning. And thank you also, Chris, for inviting me. And for everyone that's on the call, I want to say that not every financial advisor would go to the trouble and the effort to create a presentation like this. Chris is an unusual advisor, and he knows that you are conscientious about your financial assets, but he also knows that you're conscientious about the health of everything else that's important to you. Your families, your communities, your businesses, your values. And that at some level, he's aware that you are thinking about this idea of what you want your legacy to be. And even if you've never really articulated that to yourself or to him, that it's on your mind at some level. And that's the whole backdrop of the presentation today, is this idea of legacy. And I want you to, I think legacy is a hard word. I think it's kind of a vague word and vaguely intimidating, more than vaguely intimidating, I think. And people have a lot of different ideas about what the word and the idea of legacy means. And today I want you to think about it in very simple terms. The way that I think about legacy is that legacy is your influence in the lives of other people, the difference that you make in the lives of other people, whether you know them or not, and both during and after your life. And today, what we're going to be talking about is a very specific instrument called the ethical will, or as Chris says, also known as a personal legacy letter, which gives you the opportunity to make a difference in the lives of the people that you care about. And I'm going to give you an overview of ethical wills. They have a very interesting history. We're going to talk about why you would create one, what kinds of things you might like to put in an ethical will. And then we'll have an opportunity to think about your own. I want to give you some structure, some ideas for how you might actually create your own legacy letter, your own ethical will. So what is an ethical will? So when I was, years ago, I was a journalist, a freelance journalist. And I wrote for newspapers mostly, and I love to do the personal interest stories. And one of the things that I experienced over and over again when I was doing personal interest stories was that people found it really valuable to talk about their lives and to share some of the things that they had learned, and to share some of their experiences and reflect upon their values. And over again, I learned that people were really interested in this when they read them in the newspaper, and they would often say to me, I never knew that about this person that I've known my whole life. So the opportunity to put down on paper and create some kind of a record of your life experiences and what's important to you is something that I think that everybody at some level would really like to feel like they've done. But you know what? For most people, writing an autobiography or creating a memoir is simply not going to happen. And in early 2001, I read about the idea of this thing called an ethical will, and I had never heard of one before, but I did some research and learned that it is, at its root, it is a personal letter to you from your loved ones that sets down evidence of what was important to you. And then in a very small space, you could capture some of the essence of your life and your feelings and your values. And that this would be something that would be part of the record of your life. And when you boil it down, an ethical will, despite its really off-putting name, and let's admit that right away, anytime you put the word ethical and will in the same phrase, it's a little bit scary, right? Ethical will. I'll tell you the history of it in a few minutes so you know where that word comes from. But that this letter, this very personal letter, ultimately becomes part of the record of your life. Even if you might share it during your life, you might change it. It becomes ultimately something that's going to live beyond you, which is what makes it different than other kind of letters. But the fact that you cared enough to do this and set down some of the essence of your life and what was most important to you to make sure that your loved ones knew without question that you cared enough to say that, to say what you would never want to go unsaid, that is an act of love. So in essence, and then we'll boil it down, an ethical will, a legacy letter, is a kind of a love letter. So I told you to tell you something about the history of them. So when I went to go learn about what an ethical will was, I learned that it comes out of the Jewish tradition. About 800 years ago, there was the expectation that fathers would write kind of a treatise on what it would mean to lead a worthy or ethical life, and that they would write these letters to their sons. I don't know where women and mothers and daughters were, but the historical ones were fathers to sons about what it would mean to lead a worthy or ethical life. And they are very prescriptive. There's no doubt that they're intended to rule from beyond the grave. And they're sort of the rules about what it means to, be a good person, to be a good man. And I was really interested to go back and read some of these historic documents. I'm going to read you just an excerpt of one this was written by a man in around 1190. He was writing a letter to his son and started talking about money. And he said, there's an olden proverb, go to bed without supper and rise without debt. Defile not the honor of thy countenance by borrowing. May thy creator save thee from that habit. So can't you hear the sense of responsibility and love that this father has? Can't you picture him saying to his son, don't go into debt, don't get credit cards. We can hear him still, 800 years later, we can still hear his love and his concern for his son. You fast forward this is a couple hundred years ago, a businessman writes to his children. Somewhere among these papers is a will made out by a lawyer. Its purpose was to dispose of material things which we enjoy, which we may possess, dispose of any material things which I may possess at the time of my departure from this world to the unknown adventure beyond. And he goes on to say, I hope its terms will cause no ill will among you. It seemed sensible when I made it. After all, it refers only to material things which we enjoy only temporarily. I am more concerned with having you inherit something that is vastly more important. So in these old letters, this is the proof of this phrase, that words fly away, but what's written remains. These letters have remained in the written record of humankind, and they touch us still. And this is something that every single one of us has the opportunity to also create. Now, the best way for you to understand what a contemporary ethical will would sound like, and I want to say at this point that a lot of you may have already done something like this, or receive something like this from a parent or a grandparent. And maybe some of you have written letters to your children at important moments in their lives and never thought to call it anything. This is just something that you did because you love them. And people have been doing this kind of thing for a very long time and not necessarily putting a name to it. And all I'm trying to do today is to introduce you to something that that you can think about with intention, in the same kind of way that you think very intentionally about what you want to pass on to your loved ones in terms of tangible sense. The idea that you could create a vehicle for passing things on, the things on that were important to you that were intangible. That's the reason why I am, giving this a name. But I want to credit all of you for already doing things like this, if you already have done so and not necessarily called it anything. So, but let me give you some excerpts from contemporary documents. And actually this slide just summarizes what I just said. And that is that the ethical will, where I see it and where I understood it right when I first learned what they were, was I thought, this is a missing piece of estate planning, where we spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about the transfer of tangible assets. And as Chris said, the idea of passing on the intangibles is just as important. And when you think about those two things together, you're really creating an expression of a full expression of what legacy means. And that in the end, what you're really asking yourself, and when you have the opportunity to really ask yourself is, what do you have to give to your loved ones? You have money to give them, but then you have a lot of other things to give them. And what do you have to give? When you ask yourself that question, and the creation of an ethical will kind of puts you face to face with that. What do you have to give them? In the largest sense of the word, that's a very, very, very beautiful question. What do you have to give to your loved ones, both during your life and when you're no longer here? So I want to give you a flavor for contemporary ethical wills. And these are all from documents that I've had the opportunity, the great privilege of working with folks, helping them ghostwrite or coach their documents. These are all excerpts from some of my clients. So this first one is from a man who made a tremendous amount of money as an entrepreneur, and he was creating a dynasty trust, which meant that he was going to be passing on money way down the line to people, a lot of people who he might not ever know. And he wanted to make sure that when they received first were receiving distributions from the trust, that they got a personal message from him. And so he said to them, what I ultimately want to pass on to you is far greater than financial advantage, but a deep appreciation of the collective history and values that you carry in your bones. And this is your true wealth. And he went on to share the story of his parents, his grandparents, he had ancestors who were Chinese and German, and he wanted to talk about their values and what they had demonstrated in their lives, and that was really what built his business. He wanted to share his reflections about what he thought money could buy and not buy, but he wanted to make sure that that the money had context. So what he gave them was the gift of common history. That was his gift to them. This next example is a man who gave the gift of his values and his character, and he gave it in a very light manner. Look at what he did. He made a list, and this is a list of he wrote down 15 things that he knew to be true right off the bat. Without thinking a whole lot, he just set them down. And these are the 5 things. And so I chose these 5 things. You need to kick off the sheets. Busy is good. No one has a lock on a way to do something. There's value somewhere in everyone, and a joke is almost always in order. And what I love about this is that this is a proof that a legacy letter doesn't have to be heavy. It doesn't have to be long. What it does have to be is to reflect who you are authentically. If it sounds like the Boy Scout oath, sounds like something that someone else wrote, it's not going to be effective. And someone might read it once, but it's not going to stick with them. This man's character comes across loud and clear. His values come across loud and clear in a very small space, and he does it in a way that's very accessible. This next example is a gift of wisdom and life experience. And this was written by a man who traveled a lot, and he was always afraid that he might not come home, that plane would go down. He had 4 children, and they were young at the time, early teenagers, and he wanted to make sure that if his wife was alone with them, that she had something that would help her in her raising of them. And I'm happy to say that he hasn't died in a plane crash. And he shared these with his kids, who are now in their early 20s. But what he said, he told a story. And he said, "It was from my 9th grade science teacher that I first learned the concept of ebbs and flows. He drew diagrams of cycles on the board, showing naturally occurring ups and downs. I see this in all areas of life, in biology, in business, in friendships, in marriages, and in society. Everything has its ebbs and flows. And sometimes when things aren't as I'd like them to be, it's reassuring to remember this idea and not to jump in and try to force things to change." So that's a bit of wisdom and life experience wrapped up in a great story. This is an example of the gift of clarity and perspective. This was written to trustees. So this is an example of this is kind of a variation on an ethical will, in that this is a side document to a legal will that's written not to heirs, not to family members or loved ones, but to trustees, to give them the opportunity to stand in the shoes of the grantor and to have a sense of what the grantor wanted for their beneficiaries. So this is what this couple writes, and this is written by a couple. "With our experience as entrepreneurs, the idea of them taking their educations and starting businesses is attractive. For this reason, we're in full support of using the capital to start a business. Providing there is a well-vetted business plan, we feel that the decision to start a business should rest with the child and should be encouraged, even if you are not wholly in support of it." So you can imagine that a lawyer would not want this language to necessarily to be embedded in the trust document itself, but very important for the grantor to be able to share this intention, this wish, this perspective with the trustee who's going to be ultimately making the decisions. This last example is the gift of love and gratitude and the gift of a blessing, and in a very short space. So this is an excerpt from a 1-paragraph ethical will. "I fully expect," and this is a woman to her 3 children, "I fully expect that I will live for a very long time and to see you well into adulthood and to share your future with you. And there's much to look forward to, and I'm planning on being part of all the adventures and all the challenges and all the joys. But if for some reason I'm not, the most important thing you need to know is how much my love for you created the person that you will remember as me. I made you quite literally in my womb, but you made me too." And I think that this example, to me, reflects the heart of the ethical will, that what your audience most wants to hear is that you matter to them. And words of love and gratitude last a very long time in the hearts of the audience, the hearts of your family members, whether you're here, both during your life and afterwards. So I hope you have a little bit of a flavor for what an ethical will can do and some of the topics that you might cover in one and why you might want to write one. So let's just have a couple summary slides about what it is to make sure that you understand. So it's essentially a container for meaningful, enduring communication accessible after the life of its creator. That being said, it's great to share them during life as a work in progress, because you're a work in progress and your audience is a work in progress. It could very well be that you change it or you add to it, but it's a piece of intentional communication. And it can be a letter, it can be a recording, can be done by an individual or a couple. You might have one letter that's written to your chosen audience, whoever that might be the same letter, or it might be different letters to different people, or it could be theme and variations, a common letter and then additions on the end to individual people. But it's usually always to a specific audience. It's not usually sort of a letter to the world, it's to a very specific audience. These are intimate documents. Ethical wills are not long. They are between 2 and 10 pages on average. And if you try to think to yourself, what do I want to make sure my loved ones know and understand? If that's the point of writing the letter, what do I want them to know and understand without question from me? That can be a lot of information. And most of it, a lot of it, you're going to share in the course of your life. The ethical will is the opportunity to take like a 30,000-foot view of your life and put down the most important things that you would want to make sure that they knew. And that might end up being very short. Sometimes the most important things are the most timeless things, and they don't take a lot of room to put down. As I said, they can be shared during life. And I think to turn what is essentially starts off as a monologue, to turn it into a dialogue, is one of the most valuable aspects, I think, of creating a document like this. I've had the opportunity to work with a number of people who have done that intentionally. They've created estate plans and they want to be able to share the terms of the plan, their intentions behind the plan. They want to be able to share that with their children. But it's easier to set down some of their thinking in writing first and then have a conversation about it. And honestly, a lot of things are easier to say in writing than they are face-to-face. So the opportunity to put things down on paper, make sure that everyone is hearing it in the same way, and then have an opportunity to talk about, that's a beautiful process. Very important to say, ethical wills are not binding. This is a side document. The language is precatory. It is not something that will hold water in court. These are not binding. Very important to say. But if there's something that, if you're talking in your ethical will about something you've done, about a aspect of your estate plan, you want to make sure that your lawyer actually takes a look at that language to make sure that there's nothing that you say that would cloud the legal document. But in the end, the ethical will is not going to hold water in court. The legal will is what's going to hold water. As I've said before, these are works in progress because you're works in progress. If you felt like you had to wait until you were as wise as you were ever going to be, do you think you would ever write one of these? I don't think so. I think everybody thinks that there's still things that they're going to learn. You know, tomorrow I'm finally going to get it together. Tomorrow I'm going to be wise. Don't wait until tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So these are works in progress. Recognize that. And even the old documents you can see that they've been added to over time. It's one of the beauties of them. But ultimately, they're your last words. So they need to be helpful. They need to be positive. You can imagine what an unethical, ethical will would look like. It would be controlling. It would be negative. It would be critical. These documents have the potential, you create them so they're going to live beyond you, so your words remain, so people come into your presence when they read them. They need to be helpful. They need to be positive. You write them in order to share the essence of you so that other people can take from it what they need at the time that they read it. And what it boils down to is what you put down there is what you never want to go unsaid. And as I've said before, sometimes it's easier to put those things in writing than it is to say them across the dining room table. In the end, the creation of them is a blessing, not only for the people that you write, and your intention obviously is to create something that's a blessing for them. It's also a blessing for you. Because how often do you actually sit down and think about the essence of what's most important to you and what you want to transmit? How often do you take the time to put down what you never want to go unsaid? they're not a spiritual document, but it's a spiritual exercise to go through them and to do it. It's a very, very beautiful process that is highly satisfying to be able to actually set down those things that you want to make sure that you have said. As Chris said, for those of you that are clients of his or that have come in through his portals, each of you are going to receive a copy of the guidebook that I wrote, The Wealth of Your Life, a step-by-step guide for creating your ethical will. And this is a workbook style guide. It's intended for you to be able to brainstorm the kinds of things that you could talk about and ultimately narrow down what you would like to express. And in it, there are different sections that give you the opportunity to reflect upon your personal histories and your stories. Think about what your values are. What are some of the life lessons you've learned? What are the aspects of your estate plan that you might want to explain or describe? And then the opportunity to really think, what are the kinds of things that, how do I feel about who I'm writing, and what do I want to tell them, and what blessings do I want to bestow upon them with this? And the point of the guidebook is really to be able to widen the lens on everything that you could talk about, and then ultimately narrow it so that it becomes possible for you to actually write something and not get overwhelmed. It's easy, really easy to get overwhelmed if you feel like you have to tell every story, share every thought, every bit of wisdom. Don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. Please, I beg you, in the beginning especially, start with something short, so that at least you put down the essence of the message. You can always go back and add to it or change it, but do not stop yourself in your own tracks by saying, this is going to be too overwhelming for me. Start with something short. And think about, and this is one thing that the guidebook will help you think about, who would the letter be to? Who would you most want to write such a document to? Would it be your children or grandchildren? But if you don't have children or grandchildren, who else might you want to write it to? Might you want to write it to a spouse, close friends, extended family, your parents? Who would you want to write such a letter to? And why would you want to do it? What would your intention be? What would be the thing that you would hope that you could achieve with it in the long run? So what is your purpose? What is your intention? Get clear about that. Who and why? And then put yourself in the shoes of the recipients. How would you want them to feel when they read your words? That's a really powerful place to sit. How do you want them to feel? Loved, strengthened, reassured, excited, inspired? How do you want them to feel when they read your words? To understand something that perhaps they didn't understand before, to have the benefit of some information that they need? How do you want them to feel when they read your words? And what I want you to do today, right now, is to give you sort of a very simple structure for thinking about creating a 1 to 2 page document. There's 3 components, I think, that are a great place to organize your thinking to create something that's very short, something that you could do this afternoon. To express, first of all, your gratitude to the person that you're writing or the people that you're writing. What have you given? What have they given you? Thank you. What are 3 things that you have learned or know to be true? Share a little bit of wisdom right off the bat. Think, what are 3 things that you know to be true? The gentleman whose excerpt I shared earlier in the presentation, look at some of the things that he wrote. You could write those things easily too. I know you could, right off the bat. 3 things you know to be true. And then what's one thing that you wish for them in their life? If you do those 3 things, answer those 3 questions and date it and sign it and then make it accessible, you will have created an ethical will. I'm going to go back to that. You would have created something that'll make you feel terrific right off the bat. You can always go back and change it. You can always go back and add to it. But if you do those three things, thank you, a bit of wisdom, and a blessing for the people that you were writing, you've got an ethical will. Make sure that it's accessible. Make sure people know that you have put something down. It would be terrible if you wrote something and it just stayed on your computer, wouldn't it? So put a note on with your legal documents that notes, if it's not with your legal documents, then put a note with the legal documents that explains where people can find it. And make sure that it's dated and that it's signed. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, okay, this is a really, really good idea. But you know, I don't think I'm ready to do this. I think that, and I'm guessing maybe some of these are voices in your head, that maybe a voice is saying, I'm really too young to do this. I feel like I don't really quite know what I would say. Maybe I'll know better when I'm a little bit older. And you know, this really better be profound. What if I write something that sounds really silly? This needs to be profound, and I'm not profound, and man, I'm not sure I'll ever be profound. And you may think, well, they know this already, so, you know, what's the point? Or you may be thinking, well, maybe they wouldn't be interested. What if I went to all this trouble and they really weren't interested? And I certainly don't want to lecture them. I don't want to assume that they don't know something or that I know better than they do. And these are all really, really natural ways of reacting to the idea. And also the thing that will stop you from doing it. Put yourself in the shoes of the recipient. And imagine your mother or your grandfather saying to themselves, I don't really think they'd have been interested. I don't think they would really have cared to have left something like this for me. No, let me put it another way. You wouldn't want your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather, whoever you keep in mind, who you loved very much, to say to themselves that you wouldn't be interested in what they had to say. That you wouldn't know, you wouldn't want to know some of the things that made them tick. You wouldn't want to hear from them how important you were to them. No, you wouldn't say that. So do this for them. Don't get in your own way. Gratitude, wisdom, and blessing. If you seek to write a letter that does those three things in a short space, that's the start of your ethical will. This is an interesting definition of legacy that I want to leave you with, that it's a platform that you create to support the success of others. And legacy is one of those ideas that, as I said in the beginning, everybody kind of has their own sense about what that word means to them. And I've been thinking about legacy for a long time. And, you know, legacy in the end is such a mystery because we really don't understand the difference that we make in the lives of other people. We really have no idea of our influence. We're touched all the time by stories of other people, aren't we? They never know the kind of difference that they make in our lives. And legacy is also a paradox because we create legacy with our actions, but we're not ultimately in control of our legacy. Other people are. The people that choose to carry us forward in their lives, they're the ones that will realize our legacy. So the lesson there is to be aware of your potential for influence and respect your potential for influence, but then go live your life and be true to the beautiful person that you are. And in the end, this is the greatest truth of them all, that words that come from the heart will enter the heart. And that is really the deepest truth of the ethical will. So with that, I close this presentation. Thank you for your attention and your interest.
Susan, great stuff. Thank you so much. I have so many thoughts going through my head with questions and things that I'll want to think about, but I would like to just give people an opportunity if they have a few questions, specifics, styles, whatever the kinds of things they might be wondering about. Now would be a good time to feel free to put those into the Q&A box, type them in, or if you want to, you might be able to raise your hand if you'd like to be identified, to be unmuted to ask a question. So feel free to do that while we give a moment for people who may want to jot down a question. Susan, I got a couple things I might throw at you if that's all right.
Yeah.
My daughter, my youngest, just graduated from high school. So I've been starting to think about, like, all right, my kids are all at an age where, they're sort of, leaving the nest, and what's my life lessons. And, so I started thinking about this with my daughter's graduation, but I came up with like 80 bullets of little life lessons, and that might be too much, I think, so tell us about, styles and, whether it's bullets or whether it's narratives and or videos versus written. One person may be better with the written word. Somebody else may think, I'm not good at writing at all.
Right.
How do you overcome these challenges, and how do you decide what's worthy and what's not, perhaps, when you start to collect these ideas?
Good question, Chris. And I think that your impulse to do that is really wonderful. And when I hear what I hear in the question is, how is this going to be taken in? You're a little bit fearful of how this will be taken in, and perhaps will seem like it's too much for your daughter to take in, or will come across maybe as a lecture. And what I try to tell people is that the creation of a document like that is really a gift of yourself, and that you really don't know how that person is going to take in what you've said, and you're not in control of it. All you are doing is giving a gift of yourself to them, and they will read those words or listen to those words in different ways in different times of their life. And all you can do is put down on paper what you most want them to know, and trust that that is enough, without standing in judgment of, is it too much? Is it not enough? How is this going to come across?
Yeah.
And as long as your goal is not to control them, and if you want to control them, then write up a legal document that controls them. The idea is not to control them. The idea is to give them a gift of you that they will take in as they will. The old documents, we don't live in 1190 anymore, when that original document was written that I shared. Back in 1190, there was this whole idea that top-down communication was the way to go. That's what you did. And you listened to your father. You followed those rules. But that's not how we think anymore. We think much more that we teach each other, we show each other, we have things we can give to each other. And so, and it's much more of a two-way street than it is a top-down kind of communication. So I don't know what to tell you about how many bullets is enough.
There's no magic number, huh?
Yeah, and I don't know. Some people write, and bullets can be a great way to just get stuff down quickly. And I'm a big fan of bullets, actually. Or bullets that then have like a couple of lines underneath them that give a little bit of context to the bullet. or to create kind of themes of the things that you, whether it was a theme of.
Yeah, you seem to reference some themes.
Yeah.
You indicated clarity and perspective, gift of clarity and perspective was one. Are there a number of routine things that you think tend to be the kinds of categories that people might think in terms of?
Yeah, well, money is a big category in terms of people's values about money, what it will buy and what it won't buy. Thinking about another big theme is the whole idea of finding your purpose. You know, giving people permission to find their purpose and support in finding their purpose.
Yeah.
Reflections on family, reflections on marriage, opportunity to talk about when things don't go well, you know, with family and marriages, a little bit of wisdom about those sorts of things. Again, it's kind of the, it's what people, what they would most like to be able to gift to their audience, you know, in terms of perspective. And the most important one of all is the love piece, the gratitude piece, the love and the blessings piece. That to me is the most important one of all.
You had indicated a variety of examples. Are there places people can go to see what other people have written to come up with ideas?
My website has a bunch of examples. And then if you Google ethical wills, you also can come up with other places where you can find examples. There was just this incredibly beautiful example that came across the line just last week, where this man, maybe some of you saw it, but it was this 31-year-old British man who died of cancer, and he wrote this beautiful, he didn't call it an ethical will, it's just this gorgeous, gorgeous letter to his family and friends about what he realized in his short life. Just beautiful. And again, not called an ethical will, but an absolutely beautiful example of what one is. So, and people love the idea. They love to read these and share them. And things like the book Tuesdays with Maury, for those of you that remember that book, or The Last Lecture, those are all ethical wills. And people give those books to other people because they say, this guy is great. I believe, this is what I believe too, and I want you to have this book because this is what I think.
Yeah.
And they are beautiful. And it is a reinforcement of what you know. And you shouldn't be afraid to say what might sound cliched, but because so many cliches are actually rooted in truth. So, and that's why people love to share what they find online that they think is beautiful, what they read in books and they share. And this is the opportunity for you to do it too in a way that's way more intimate than sharing a book that somebody else wrote.
Hey, Chris and Susan, we have a few questions that have been entered.
Let's go to those.
I'll read them. The first one is, what should you exclude in an ethical will?
Yeah, very good question. I touched upon that a little bit. Controlling language, criticism, negative comments, comments that, passive-aggressive comments that, especially when you're no longer here to answer them, could cast a long shadow in the lives of the people that you write. So that's sort of, to write an ethical will with the intention of casting doubt on your love, casting doubt on your intentions, should be excluded from a legacy letter.
Good. Okay. Here's another one that came in. Can you get help creating one?
I wrote the guidebook so that to give people the confidence that they could do this themselves. And I believe that anybody can write and should write an ethical will by themselves. But for some people who'd like some coaching on it, or for people who, for some reason or other, cannot write it themselves, then help is available. And I do have a coaching practice myself where I help people think through what they might want to talk about, with the intention of supporting them in writing their own. But I also do provide, especially through some folks that are ghostwriters, people that I partner with, I can provide referrals to people that will actually do the whole soup to nuts ghostwriting process. So there certainly is help. You can contact me through my website, Personal Legacy Advisors, if you want to talk about that kind of support.
And I do want to remind people that we have a copy of complimentary copy of your book. We'll have them at our office, Asset Management Resource Office, tomorrow between the hours of 9 to 5. If people want to stop in and pick one up, we will have our AMR face masks on, so we'll be a safe environment, and we'll have one available, an AMR face mask available for you too. If you pop in, you can get the book and the face mask. And our address is, for those of you who haven't visited our office, we're at 1060 Falmouth Road in Hyannis. If people need to make a special arrangement to get their book, they can give us a call at 508-771-8900. So just a couple other questions that came up, and I want to remind people, if you have a question for Susan, just raise your hand or enter it in the Q&A box on Zoom. One of the questions was, should you include historical information about things that happened in your life, about key events or things that either happened to you personally or that just were historical in nature?
Yes, if that is information that you want to make sure that people have heard from you and understand and know, yes. It's also, so that kind of straight information, whether it's family history, whether it's an explanation of something that happened that you want to make sure that everybody knows and understands, totally appropriate. And in the guidebook, there's a whole section about helping you think through what kind of historical information that you might want to include. So the thing that's beautiful about creating an ethical will is that it's not an autobiography. You don't have to create a chronological history. You're really just pulling out the things that are the most important that you want to make sure that people know and understand and have a record of. So for many people, that is historical information, whether it's the stories of ancestors, whether it's the story of a business, whether it's the story of important relationships to you. All those things are potentially very important to include, and can also be part of not only just sharing information, but sharing your reflection on that information. So for the story of your ancestors, might be really interesting to also put a little bit in there about the way that those stories have influenced you, what some of those values are that have come down through the generations. So not just the information, but if you're so inspired and inclined to do it, to be able to also put down some of your own perspective on that information.
Nice, nice. And then the last question that I had come in was, is it better to handwrite or type the legacy letter, or what about doing it via video?
I used to think that handwritten documents were the best. But you know what? People in the future are not going to be able to read handwriting, unfortunately, is one thing. Also, handwriting is sometimes hard to read. So I think that while handwriting is very expressive of a person's personality, and I think that there can be a time and place where handwriting is the perfect thing to do, and there's an intimacy to handwriting that I think is really beautiful. I also don't think that you should be afraid that your personality wouldn't come across if you typed it. And you can certainly have a combination of typing and handwritten if you wanted to create a part of it that was typed and then some kind of a personal note, certainly your signature, but maybe some kind of a personal note that's handwritten. Video, I think video can also, for some people, be a really good tool. And I'm not against video at all. My only caution about video is that if these are intended to live a long time beyond you, to be discovered and re-experienced by people another generation or two down the line, the technology of being able to view the video might change. So if you do create a video, make sure it continue to be accessible, and in you know, ways where the thing itself wouldn't degrade over time the way sometimes they do, DVDs or flash drives. So to put it on the cloud too, as well as putting it on some kind of a drive, is what I would recommend. But video can be a wonderful way of expressing yourself.
Great. Well, thank you, Susan. Great information.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over now to you, Kathy.
Sounds good.
As we transition, just to remind everybody, if they want to learn more about some of the tools and resources or the coaching available in this process, you can learn more about Susan and her efforts in helping in this process of developing your legacy letter, your ethical will, by going to personallegacyadvisors.com. And with that, let's take a few minutes to talk about a few financial planning, more mundane types of things. Hard to follow that topic, I guess, talking about values and all these great life lessons. But let's talk about some things that are a little bit of the nitty gritty. And with that, maybe we can advance to the next slide. You know, we've been getting a lot of questions about elections lately. It's on everybody's mind. The markets, you know, will my portfolio be altered as a consequence of what's happening and our expectations for outcome and so forth. So just to remind everyone, first and foremost, that our investment process for our discretionary managed investments are active. We refer to our process as active allocation. This is one example of the 50-50 simple strategy that we manage. It's comprised of mutual funds and ETFs, but the point being, we will, based on expectations, make adjustments within the portfolio for risk to alter based on market valuations and expectations. So right now, our posture is modestly underweight in risk, or a little bit understated, and that is likely to continue for a little while longer. But we will be paying attention to what happens in the world around us. And politics is one of those things, but let's talk a little bit about that in more detail for a moment. You know, it's important to remember that stocks are a long-term asset. And as we look at this, is just a particular snapshot of the S&P 500 since 1993, somewhat of an arbitrary, but I think it was the particular ETF or mutual fund that we used to reflect the movement of the market that was available for data, but a relatively decent amount of time here. And you can see, just given time, stocks have risen. We're 7.7 times higher roughly than where we were in 1993 in this instance. There's going to be volatility, there's going to be sell-offs, and that's why we want to pay attention to our risk orientation and how much stock exposure we want to have for a given person's temperament for risk and willingness to endure volatility. We think in terms of buckets again, now, soon, later. Now we want to have money in the bank and relatively stable, and an emergency fund that's readily accessible. Soon, we'd like to have some money that's relatively stable, and but not without risk, but accessible if we need it, and perhaps have the opportunity for a little bit better return than we might get in the bank, and less exposure, you know, overall than we might have to our later, longer term bucket. Whatever your mix of things, this is how we usually try to approach your portfolios and your various investment accounts, to try to think in terms of different risk profiles and exposures, so that when there's volatility, if we have some resources that are available to us, we might be less anxious about what's happening in the market. So if you're uncertain, first and foremost, if you're really worried about what may be around the corner, whether it's markets or viruses or whatever the issues of the day that you're focused on, and of course there's always the unknowns with international affairs and who knows what, it's a good time to review your risk profile. Let's face it, markets have really come back. Even if we're not at our highs, we're relatively close to our highs. And if you're uncertain about what the future holds, it's a reasonable time to entertain scaling back risk if you're really worried about it. So feel free to reach out to us if that's your concern. But that being said, you know, when we look at the S&P 500, and these are various presidents going back some 50 years or so, a little more, I think, maybe since post-World War II. You know, in various instances, we see examples where, irrespective of the political party that is in power in the presidency, markets have the opportunity to rise, and it will vary from one to the next. And as you can see here, you know, of course, what's happening in the George Bush administration was we had terror, we've had, you know, the ramp up for response to that terror that's, you know, more recent. But, you know, so, but by and large, pretty much the rest of these, you can see that in most instances, there's upside opportunity that comes out of the market. So, and as we move on, you know, don't be overly stressed about what's happening in the election, because what we're doing, and I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but this is something Brian Regan put together to really just make the point that as we look at policy prescriptions that may come out of one administration or another, we can point to areas where it might have detrimental impact or favorable impact, whether it's our stocks or our bonds, and different industries that would be benefited or disadvantaged. We will be looking to identify some of these issues and make adjustments to the portfolios accordingly to tilt in ways that we see more opportunity or away from ways where we see more risk. That's really all that is intended to convey. Let's continue. Wanted to just talk about the Electoral College for a minute. You know, we hear polling data, and you know, polls 2 months out, a lot can change. I mean, we're a little less than 2 months, but so much can change. Right now, there's a slight, the average polling gives a slight favorable advantage to the Democrats in the polling for the upcoming election for the presidency. 270 is the number of electoral votes that is required. This is the average. I went on to some other sites to look at different data, and let's start by looking at what happened the last go around. If you remember, in the 2016 election, please advance. In the 2016 election, polling was also very tight and favored the Democrats going into that election. And as it turns out, this is how the electoral math played out. And so it's presently a little different. And so there's a couple of key states where we'll see that there's some different expectations. Up in some of the states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Florida, there's several others that are close, but Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin are presently slated for slightly favored for Democrat electoral math. New Hampshire is also somewhat close, but looking like there's an expectation for a Democrat change. Can you go to the next slide? What I tried to do is take, this was CNN, which a group of polls that I looked at, CNN had the least favorable math that favored the Biden administration. So I wanted to start with that and say, how close might this really come? But you can see in that instance, we've got New Hampshire somewhat close, could go either way. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin slightly favored for the Democrats, sorry, Michigan and Minnesota in that instance, Nevada, Colorado. These are all slightly favored to go toward the Democrats. But then we've got Arizona, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, and Wisconsin, all of which are, you know, statistically dead heat right now, could go either way. And so what I want to do is just say, well, what if? You know, what if we had Arizona, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, all go toward Ohio even, all go toward the Republicans? And let's look at that on the next slide. You know, it's all these different states. Sorry, go back a slide, I guess, on this slide. So it shows here that we would be down to, you know, a squeaker, you know, could come out to, which way does Wisconsin go? That would be about the closest mix of things that we might see. But as I said before, you know, Pennsylvania, Michigan, New Hampshire, these are all possibly, it's still time will tell. So, you know, it's really going to be coming down to how does this electoral math play out? Florida is thought to be the key state, again, for how this will define the outcome of the election. And so, you know, at this point in time, the bottom line is it's really just, it's a toss-up. And we'll just be watching to see how this plays out. And as we get closer to the election, to try to interpret what kind of impact it might have on the election. And it's important to remember, though, that irrespective of who wins the presidency, we do expect perhaps some additional stimulus and the outcome that, you know, there's an opportunity, there's going to be opportunities in either way things go. So not to get overly anxious, you know, a lot of people get nervous about how this might play out and what kind of consequences it may have. This next slide is really just pointing to the reality that it's not just about the election is not just about the presidency this time around. We've also got a very tight Senate race. And here again, polling is, you know, in flux and it's very uncertain. But the way it looks right now is there's a handful of states that could go either way. And, you know, it's very possible we could end up with a tied balance of allegiances, if you will, between Democrat and Republican policymakers. You know, there's I think an independent or two in the mix, but they tend to, you know, caucus with the Democrats. So you could end up with something that's really tight here, where and whoever wins the presidency, because the vice president casts the deciding vote when there's a 50-50 tie, we could end up with whoever wins the presidency controls the Senate as well, ultimately. So here again, a lot to watch for. At present, it's not expected that the House will flip out of the control of the Democrats. It's still expected to be retained by the Democrats this go around. I think that's the next slide that shows that. So we'll, you know, again, all of these are things we're paying attention to, trying to examine. And there's plenty of things that people can differ with and disagree with. Some of the things, we're not trying to put it in terms of who do you root for, who do we want to see. All we're trying to do is try to pay attention to what might the outcome be and how could that impact your portfolio policy-wise and so forth. If there is for example, one party controls House, Senate, and White House, it's more likely that there's going to be more dramatic execution of policy. should there be some difference in who controls the leadership of the two houses, chambers of Congress, that is a little more, I think, generally encouraging to markets, because things aren't going to likely to be changing so dramatically. It's a little harder to push policy through. And so, you know, hard to say what will happen and necessarily how markets will react. We're expecting between now and markets that there will continue to be some volatility between the elections. There will be some volatility in the markets. It's just, you know, there's a lot of changing dynamics and uncertainty breeds volatility. So we will await that. That being said, we also think that, you know, things are shaping up favorably when it comes to the virus and the movement toward a vaccine or other types of treatments. And that also will have some favorable benefit to the markets. Markets will be anticipating that. And so, you know, I just think it's too simple to say, oh, politics, and therefore this is how I want to respond in my portfolio. It can be a common mistake people make, is to let their political perspectives interfere with their portfolio performance. And so I would just urge people to not overreact. If you're concerned, it's a good time to talk about it and perhaps make some adjustments to your strategies. But overall, I think we're trying to keep you in good hands, so that we will be adjusting strategies as needed, depending on how things play out. We don't expect an immediate change, just no matter who is in the White House and what happens with the Senate and the Congress overall. We don't expect you know, rapid changes in policy because of the nature of us being in a recession. Whether it's tax policy or anything along those lines, it wouldn't likely be an immediate increase in taxation or something like that, should there be a change in the White House or the policies of the Senate. So let's go on. I've kind of hit on all these points, so I'm going to just move on in the interest of time. Again, the final point would be, if you need help, if you're concerned about this, particularly concerned about this, we're happy to talk to you about it in more detail and offer some counsel as it relates to how we might want to think about your investment strategies. I do see that there may be a question in here. Kathy, can you tell me what that chat issue was? Let me see if I can find it here. Chat. The question came in that some people are concerned about the possibility of violence regardless of who wins. What effect would that have on the markets? Yeah, I think that's a fair question. Certainly if there is and it is expected that because of the likelihood of significant amount of mail-in voting, absentee ballots because of the virus and so forth, that we will likely have a delay in the defining of the results of the presidency. Ballots will take time because of the virus, in all likelihood, to be tabulated, though it's uncertain. But I think that that's a reasonable expectation. And should that happen, I think that that does create a lot of anxiety in the society as we await those results. Whether or not there'll be violence, I mean, certainly I hope not. I'm sure we all hope not. But you know, I would certainly agree that that could create some instability in the market, but I don't think it would be prolonged in nature, in the sense of my expectation is that that's a temporary disruption, not a prolonged disruption. Were there any other questions as it relates to political content in the Q&A, Kathy? You're on mute, just so you know, so we can't hear you.
Yep, that would help, right? I think we had just one. It was, how does the market historically do when the House and Senate are divided?
Yeah, there's some great data on this, and it depends on which party you're talking about, how the details play out. In fact, I don't have it at my disposal, but I do have a rundown of this. We went through this on a call, on a radio show. The bottom line is it's mixed, but overall, it's generally positive that markets, on average, perform favorably. Of course, this is over many presidencies that we're saying this average. So it's an unknown. The likelihood is that when there's a split, it does prevent dramatic changes in policy, and that, again, generally markets favor that because there's not going to be any drastic shift, and there's more predictability that comes with that. So I think the notion of a split when it comes to Senate versus House, control is probably something that would be more favorably viewed by the markets than unfavorably viewed.
Right.
Okay, so with this, I want to introduce Mike Perna, who is going to comment a little bit about, this is one of his favorite slides, and in the process of that, Mike will probably also mention our active allocation process again. But Mike, do you have your mute turned off?
Yep, I do.
All right, pass it over to you.
I've often found this chart to be very helpful when I'm talking to clients, particularly clients, who come to us for the first time, and we explain to them our process of active asset allocation. The white boxes that you can see in the middle represent an allocated portfolio. It has approximately 60% in stocks, both foreign and domestic, also including large and small cap stocks. And it also includes bonds, commodities, and real estate. And if you'll notice that those asset categories comprise this chart. And what we see is that the allocated portfolio, never is at the top of the return for the year. It's never at the bottom, But it's particularly noteworthy in a year like 2008, when the stock market was down 37%, as indicated by the large cap green box, and our portfolio of asset allocation was down 25%. That's a 12% difference. And that's significant because whenever we go into a period where stocks appear, to have been run up in price, like the current period, we can be assured that with an allocated portfolio, we're going to, if the market does turn down quickly, we are going to, lose money, no doubt, but it won't be anything like how the stock market is performing. And over time, we should do, quite well. The chart on the left shows, how we've done over the period 2005 to 2019. And the allocated portfolio, shows that over that period, we got a 6.6% return. Now, the large caps, the big companies, the S&P 500 companies, have actually done the best over that time, 9%. But had we moved the clock back to, let's say, 2012, we would have seen, that in the prior 15 years, it was actually the allocated portfolio that did better. It doesn't show on this map, but that's what we would have seen. So it indicates the significance of having an allocated portfolio. Now, in addition, we often get asked, Well, if you think the market's going to turn down, why don't you, move the portfolio to a more secure allocation? You can never tell that. That isn't something that we can realize beforehand. So we have to do it when we're putting the portfolio together for the client, specifically for that client. Now, on each quarter, at the end of each quarter, we try to determine what we think the next quarter is going to look like, and we make changes to the portfolio. But I would say those changes are more like tweaks. Okay? They're not wholesale changes. They're minor changes, okay? But if the client thinks that over the period coming up, that there are going to be, more significant changes in the market, we advise them to be in touch with us, because at that point, we want to change the risk profile so we can make more dramatic changes to the portfolio. Okay, but generally speaking, okay, your risk tolerance that we determine when we initially begin, okay, allocating portfolios for you determines, okay, how that mix is going to play out.
Very good. I would just reiterate an item or two that, going back to that, please. Just to reinforce something Mike said, that, as much as we do actively make adjustments to our portfolios, it's not all in, all out. It's not momentum driven. It's not something where we're making radical changes. Rather, they're more modest in the grand scheme of things. We're still keeping the portfolio asset allocation oriented toward the intended risk profile, for the example of the 50-50 we mentioned earlier. We may see the portfolio where it acts like it has 45% in stock, or maybe at other times 55% in stock, as an example, and whether we emphasize greater value or growth or small companies or large companies or international or domestic, these are all parts of the tweaks, as Mike called them, that we might do. This material here was not our performance specifically. This was a slide from JP Morgan Asset Management. And the concept here is really just to convey that the mix of assets helps to steady the results by not having all the risk of just one type of asset category, which may be the winner or the loser from one year to the next. And we don't know, as Mike said in advance, how that will play out. So we want to have exposure to a variety of asset categories. If I could, before we transition to Scott and Mike, did you have anything else? Is that okay with?
No, that sounds just about exactly right.
Great. Before we transition to Scott, I was able to just get my hands on the article that I was referencing earlier to that last question we had about when there's a split Congress. And I'm sure you won't be able to see my screen, but there, of course I have my virtual background interfering. But there's an article that the Kiplinger Personal Finance had in their September issue, where it did address this very issue. And there's a good graphic in it where it went down and said, what if there's a Republican sweep? If we looked at the history of the S&P 500 since 1933 to present, in that instance, there's been about an average of a 13% rate of return. If there's a Republican president with a split Congress, it averaged a 6% rate of return. If there's a Republican president with a Democrat Congress, it averaged a 5% rate of return. If we had a Democrat president and sweep of Congress, that averaged 9% per year. If there was a split between the Congress or an all Democrat Congress, it was 14 to 13% respectively. So the point being that it's different outcomes. All of these average in favorable positive territory overall, typically. These are averages. We don't know what the real outcomes would be in looking forward. And I think it becomes relevant to say again that, there's opportunities in different areas perhaps, and there might be different sector emphasis that we'd want to focus on as we look ahead. With that being the case, if people, if anyone, whoever asked the question wants to find that article, I'm happy to send them a copy of it and share that. Scott, we're going to introduce now Scott Birmingham to also just briefly explain some tools that we have available in the financial planning space that very few of our clients may even be aware of. And it's a great opportunity if you'd like to take advantage of that. So Scott, take it away.
Sure, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so we're just going to jump to the financial planning side of things. We covered estate planning, we covered portfolio, but both of which are factors in your financial plan. But I just want to point out a few tools, kind of newer, that we have available for clients that I think are quite beneficial. So you have the ability now to actually aggregate your accounts over here at Asset Management Resources. What does that mean? It means if you have an account outside of AMR, so you have a Fidelity account, maybe a 401k at your current employer, or maybe an old employer, maybe an old IRA sitting out somewhere. You have the ability to simply link those accounts to our platform. And what do I mean by that? You simply just go in with a few keystrokes. You're able to set up and link your account so the data is brought over, and on a daily basis, you can go to one place. So you can go to your own personal portal and see your accounts here at AMR, but you also see your accounts over at whatever provider you have outside, if you have any. The benefit of that is on a daily basis, you don't have to go to one place to find out, how your account's performing. If we go to the next slide quickly, Kathy. But in addition, if you have outside accounts outside of AMR, you can look at your portfolio as a whole. So AMR plus, maybe your TIA-CREF account that's outside at work. And you take a look, am I taking too much risk compared to what do I think it was? Does it match up with what I'm doing over at AMR? So besides looking at the whole portfolio, you can actually click on each account and see how they're doing. Again, these are updated daily. It's not shown on the screen, but you can go into a little more detail. You can see the risk on each portfolio. You can see the sectors you're holding, be it financial, technology. You can see if maybe there's some overweight in certain areas. It'll break out how much large cap you have, how much small cap. So it's a nice, easy way to look at your big overall financial picture in one place. Clients have been asking for that, so we've added that feature, and so far we've had a really good response with it. To go a step further, besides listing your investment accounts and linking them, you could link your bank accounts, you could link your savings, your credit cards. The idea behind that is we have a feature that as soon as you link those accounts, so for example, say you link your Bank of America checking account, it will immediately go in and draw 3 months worth of data and put it into the program. So the idea is you can get a good look at what your expenses are. This is something folks have been asking for a while. I think it's really important for pre-retirees and maybe even folks as they just kind of get into retirement to get a good handle of what their expenses are. Where's the money going? So we as advisors can just see what you're seeing right here. We just see a general picture, what's being spent on housing, auto, insurance. You as the client, though, get to go into more detail and see every transaction that's occurring. You can categorize it however you want. So we don't care if you're going to Starbucks 4 times a day and getting a big latte. We just want the big overall picture to help you plan for your retirement. Planning for retirement. So we have the ability to run projections. The idea is we will take a look at your investment accounts. We will look at your Social Security, your pensions. The program includes taxes, your required minimum withdrawals, and of course your expenses. The idea is we're going to run 1,000 scenarios to get a probability of will you be successful to take money out of your account on a regular basis with the portfolio you have, with the Social Security or possible pension you have coming in. The idea is we want to stress test what you're doing. So we can run multiple scenarios, different retirement dates, different expenses, run scenarios for Social Security, excuse me. And the idea is we're going to run something that's comfortable for you, put a plan in place, and work off that. And then every year we can update it. Again, one of the new features is you get your own personal portal. So you just type in one password, see all your accounts here and outside, see your checking, see your savings, see your credit cards, available on the internet. But there actually is a iPhone, Android, iPad app that you can get. And right on the app, it'll have all the information, your transactions, your investment accounts. And it's hard to see on this little screen, but down in the left-hand corner, you'll actually see your retirement projection, like how successful are your projections for retirement. And that'll update daily based on what we're doing.
What's the right time for when's the right time for a person to go in and start using this tool?
This is great for pre-retirees and retirees. I mean, if you just want to go to one spot and see where your information is, this is an easy way to do it. Instead of logging into 5 different accounts. And it's a real benefit to us as well. So when we sit down with clients and we have up-to-date information, so we can make educated decisions for you, or if you just give a call in to us, we can just pull up your accounts. Again, we can make more educated suggestions for you, knowing what everything's going on in your other portfolios, what's going on in your accounts. So it's a way for people to get more organized. It's a way to get more detailed planning so we can make better decisions for you, make better suggestions.
And how can someone access the tool?
It's as easy as me sending you an email. So you contact us, let us know you're interested. We send you an email and it's really quick to set up, and we'll walk you through the basic steps, and you let us know what you're interested in. So there's a lot of tools involved, but just like budgeting for one, real simple to set up, linking your accounts, real simple to set up. So for clients, I'm sure a lot of them know, if you go to asset management, AMRfinancial.com, there is a client section. On that client section, you can see the Right Capital is actually the tool I've just been discussing. That's kind of listed in the bottom right-hand corner. So that's available to you. But for our clients, they've probably seen in the past, you can access Morningstar through AMR, which is our investment platform. It does a lot of our research. And it kind of provides more graphical view of your portfolio performance. And then our custodian is TD Ameritrade. For folks who are a little more just number-based, show me a spreadsheet, they'll look at their accounts through TD Ameritrade that way. And then Money Guide Pro, which is a kind of a long-standing financial planning program we've had for years, they can access their plans through Money Guide Pro as well. So we essentially have 2 planning programs, Right Capital being the newest one with a few new features. But just going to AMR, you can access all that.
Okay, we've gone a little longer. Thank you, Scott. That's great stuff, and hopefully we'll get the opportunity for our clients to take advantage of those great tools, more so than we've been doing so far. I don't know if there are any other questions at this time, Kathy, but I know we've gone longer than expected, and I certainly want to thank everyone for being a part of our program today. You know, we've talked about a lot of the story that thanks to Susan of, you know, remembering, you know, the important priorities of your life that you want to share with your loved ones through the ethical will. Remember that you have the opportunity to pick up your guide. I can't quite show it on my screen, but the guide that tomorrow, if you want to come by the office to get yours, certainly do between 9 and 5. We'll also have some masks if people want to pick up a mask. We will be posting this presentation on our website as well. The context of planning is the financial planning. That's to help make sure the roadmap for you is making sense. It's sort of helps to fill us in on the why and the how we can get there, and the portfolio helps us accomplish that. That's how we try to view ourselves, but in the planning context, that we're trying to make help you get the outcome you want for the values you have, And today, Susan, I want to just thank you for being a part of our presentation today and for helping people to give some thought to the ideas of what's really important and what they really want to pass on beyond the financial, but when it comes to the values. She's probably on mute. Yeah, she's still muted. Susan, there you go.
Here I am. I was muted. Thank you again. Thank you again, Chris, for your invitation. And for all of you who are listening, I really appreciated your attention.
Thanks so much for making the time. And for everyone, if you care to, just be aware that we have access through various social media resources. We have our podcast of the radio show that's available. And we've been producing a great deal of newsletter type materials that we can make available to you and produce probably through the website most easily for you to access. But if you have any questions about any of your planning, whether it's relating to the legacy letter or whether it relates to your financial plan and portfolio management, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at our office. You can reach us at the usual numbers you are familiar with, or our toll-free number, 866-771-8901. And thanks everybody for your time today.